And we begin today's show in Beijing, where more and more people are taking to the slopes as skiing grows in popularity. The sport got even more attention this winter after Beijing officially entered its bid to host the Olympics for the year 2022. China has never had a strong reputation for winter sports, but the possibility of hosting the Games has inspired many to strap on some skis as the nation once again sets its sights on the Olympic Games.
Dashing through the snow, this 8-year-old from Beijing just can't get enough fresh powder. He hits the slopes almost every winter weekend. And it's becoming more than just a holiday hobby.
I had a gate crossing competition this season and ranked 5th.
Guo started skiing when he was just 5, following in his father's ski boots. Every Friday, they drive nearly 250 kilometers to the popular ski town of Chongli to spend the weekend slicing their way through the snow.
I think the slopes here are longer and richer in variety than skiing parks in Beijing.
The air in the mountains is much better, and skiing trains one's balance. It's good for coordination. All skiing fans know that the white snow, fresh powder, is like a drug. It makes people addicted.
Decades ago, skiing wasn't a mainstream sport in China. Some didn't even know it was a sport.
I discovered skiing by chance. I didn't know there was such a sport until I watched a Winter Olympics on television. Then I tried it and introduced it to my son.
But times are changing, and the Guos are not the only family rushing to the skiing resort after hours of driving. Wanlong Ski Resort is one of the parks making the most of the sport's growing popularity. It has 6 cable car lines and 22 skiing trails across varying terrain. In the 2012 ski season, it saw just 40,000 visitors taking to the slopes, then 60,000 people the next year. The park says it expects that number to double by the end of this season.
Our skiing resort is one of the training bases of China's national skiing team. It's also the competition field of many big events, including the Far East Cup, held by the Federation International de Ski. Other countries like Japan and South Korea also come to our resort for training, because every year we open earlier and close later.
Parks like this one are pumping money into building new slopes and facilities because nearby Beijing has bid to host the 2022 Winter Olympics. Some of these resorts could host the competitions.
The skiing industry has only just begun in China. The bid for the Winter Olympics might ensure prosperity sooner rather than later. But I believe the industry has a bright future even without the Games.
Last year in Sochi, the Chinese national team won 3 gold, 4 silver and 2 bronze medals. China ranked 12th in the world and topped all Asian countries. Vancouver 2010 saw the team set an all-time record of 5 gold medals, but most of them came on the ice rather than on the slopes. Skiing is becoming more and more popular across China, especially here in the colder northern regions. The sport is expected to really take off now that Beijing has bid to host the Winter Games in 2022. The city will find out whether it was successful in around 6 months' time. But now, skiing parks in Chongli are trying their best to prepare for the event. With the Olympic bid, skiing has never been more popular. It's hoped if China's national team can do the country proud at the Winter Games, so more and more young skiers like Guo Jingze will be inspired to take to the slopes. Li Chaoran, CCTV, Chongli.
A lovely story about Chinese looking forward to the Winter Olympic Games. Talking about that, we are joined in the Beijing studio by Mr. Dong Jun, our sports commentator on CCTV News. And also in Miami, we have Eric Farnsworth, Vice President of Council of Americas, but he really has his heart in sport. In fact, he's an expert on international sports as well. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
First of all, how competitive usually, Mr. Farnsworth, is it to bid for the Winter Games? After all, we know it is not as attractive as the summer one.
Well, it's still a very competitive issue. Look, this is an international competition that brings a lot of stature to the winning country, the winning city, and so it's very competitive. For 2022, however, there are really only 2 remaining bid cities, Beijing and Almaty, Kazakhstan. And so from that perspective, it looks like Beijing has a pretty good chance in terms of actually landing the Winter Games in 2022. It's true they're not as large or as well established as the Summer Olympic Games, but they certainly have a very strong following and are highly sought after, and I think really depend on the ability of countries to pull them off.
Two finalists, of course, the International Olympic Committee is having inspection tours in these two places bidding for the Winter Games, but Dongjun, we know the shortcomings of Beijing and Zhangjiakou jointly bidding for the Winter Games. One, they complain about lack of real snow. Secondly, what about the air pollution? Do we have solutions to these two issues?
I don't think those issues are very key obstacles for Beijing's
They are
bid
not?
because Beijing is very smartly now teaming up with Zhangjiakou to bid, and apparently Zhangjiakou, once successful, Zhangjiakou will be hosting most of the ski and snow sports, and Beijing have very good indoor skating facilities. I don't think that's a problem. And the second issue about pollution, I think it depends on how determined the Chinese government and also as well as the whole nation are to tackle this problem, and also because the country is undergoing some fundamental changes in terms of its development model. And when you look at the APEC days, and now, even now, when the population of Beijing is decreasing during the holiday season, you can see more blue skies, and this demonstrates people with very strong evidence that now that you are determined and you take very concrete actions, you do see the results.
We still have a few years to go, 7 years to go before 2022. Mr. Farnsworth, do you think what Mr. Dong here in Beijing studio illustrated really convincing, at least to your ears, and many possibly those judges going to these two cities trying to figure out which one to choose?
Well, I think these are the main considerations. Look, you have to have snow for the Winter Olympics by definition. And there are some cities that have manufactured snow in the past, but that is a consideration that has to be taken into account. In terms of the pollution issue, when Beijing hosted the Summer Olympic Games in 2008, pollution was brought under control. The government took strong actions along those lines. And one could assume that the same would occur if Beijing was successful in terms of landing the 2022 Winter Games. But those are significant issues. I think I would go back to what I first said, though, and that is that you also have to look at who the competition is. And if there's only one other bid city competing against Beijing, you have to take the better bid. And to the extent that there might be shortcomings in that bid, then simply work with the organizers to try to change those shortcomings and make sure that the games are successful nonetheless.
Well, certainly, as you may know, Mr. Farnsworth, the Chinese government has always been a very big supporter for hosting, whether it's the Summer Games and this time for the Winter Games. The Chinese President Xi Jinping, even when he is meeting with some of the sports circle international officials, talking about the country is enthusiastic about this bid, and he's also talking about China can contribute 300 million winter sports lovers if China really gets the bid. How attractive is that, do you think, to the IOC members, to their ears?
Well, I think that's very attractive. Look, one of the purposes of the games, whether winter or summer, is to increase participation in sport and to have a country the size and importance of China, which is really an untapped resource in terms of winter sports, skiing, for example, that really isn't a traditional sport necessarily in China. If the Winter Games were to be able to launch an entire industry, an entire segment of population that pursues these interests, that would be tremendously interesting to the Olympic Committee, in my view. When the United States received the World Cup soccer tournament in 1994, one of the specific reasons for being awarded the World Cup was to develop the game of soccer in the United States. And so this is a consideration for committees, and I would anticipate it would be the same with Beijing.
We can see what impact it already have on your country, sir, when it comes to soccer. After all, your President Barack Obama is already boasting about Team America in front of Angela Merkel when she was visiting Washington, D.C. But back to the Beijing bid, the Winter Games. Let me ask you, Mr. Dong, we talk about China's bidding. the reason why China wants to bid is not necessarily China needs another come-out party. After all, China did that 2008 for the Summer Games. So more is about how to create a winter sports culture in this country and how to create a whole industry system related to this. How easy is it, do you think, that can be done? Is the government support really reliable for the sustainable development of this culture and also of this system?
I agree with you. I think the question is really to the point. I think when you compare 2008 Beijing Summer Games and now the bid for the 2022 Winter Games, the attitude and the rationale and the motive are completely different. Back then, it was like making a dream come true for the entire nation without worrying too much about its further effect on the country's sporting enthusiasm and on its future economic development. But now I think it's a very rational decision to bid for the Chinese government and also sports authorities, because China is undergoing some fundamental changes to its economic development model, and the government is paying more attention to people's well-being physically and mentally. I think once the government is determined to bid, it has a very complete overall plan of what to do surrounding the Winter Games. Not only to enrich the skiing and snow sporting culture in China, but also to make millions or hundreds of millions of Chinese people to be busy and get hired in a new development model, and because you need service industry.
Certainly, it's easy that we praise this decision, but let me ask you specifically, Mr. Dong. First of all, is it really possible, given the fact that winter sports are usually much more expensive than the kind of sport that you can practice during the summer games? After all, you can just have a court and play basketball, right? But winter sport, usually you need a lot of different equipment and stuff like that. And many people say this is a kind of sports only belonging to the middle class and the upper middle class, and also illustrated in our background there. People with a little bit well-off life could go there. After all, you have to travel quite several hours in order to get there every weekend. Yeah,
that makes sense. But Tianwei, I really don't think cost is a big issue. But when you look at those, when you look at those super luxury shops in Europe and America, how many Chinese are squeezed in the shops and keep buying?
Until they drop.
I really don't think so. I think even a fraction among the Chinese middle class or upper middle class will be a big number, the biggest size of any consumer in the world. And also, once you have all the policies and regulations adopted to support the growth of this, I really think it's easy for China to turn hundreds of millions of people from one thing to another.
Wow,
China, Chinese people are still the most mobile and fast-changing world.
Hopefully it's not just the campaign. And another thing really that's important is what is going to happen to the already existing sports system that we have in this country, and how to encourage winter sport, not just as a leisure sport, but rather as a competitive sport. Mr. Farnsworth, I'm sure you are reading very extensively about the Chinese sports system. At this moment, we are still having this so-called one national system, which is to have the government provide all the funding for the professional athletes to perform well in their specific field. Let me throw you an example, very specifically, curling. It's such a niche sport, and yet only 7 years after China joined the International Curling Association, the Chinese women are getting the top titles of international curling games during the Winter Games. But is that going to be really a healthy system as we debate here? Government support versus real market development. Mr. Farnsworth.
Well, I think those are very important questions for the long-term development. I think in order to develop any sport in any country, you need really three things. You need inspiration. In other words, you need role models, people who have succeeded internationally in the sport that you can look up to, number one. Number two, you need money. You need financial support, and that's where the Chinese government has been instrumental in the past. In the United States, we have a different system, of course. It's corporate support, it's sponsorships, it's such things, and that could be considered in terms of the Chinese context at some point. The other thing you need is you need people with leisure time and disposable income and the ability to actually pursue these sports and activities outside of perhaps regular jobs or careers. And this goes to the point about some of the niche sports like curling. Curling is not a huge sport in the United States, but there are some people who pursue it passionately and with full time. But that requires a career track. That requires money behind it so that you can actually make a living. I would imagine that as those issues continue to be developed in China, you will see even niche sports become popular, because there will be a percentage of people who will devote their time to that and follow it.
Right.
Will it become a broad-based sport that the entire population pursues? Probably not, but that's true with any sport in any country.
All right, snowboarding, for example, we are seeing some footage of that. Curling, for example. Eventually, whom are we depending on for the real development of winter sports here in China, Mr. Dong?
I can only guess the top leadership of China, by promising to contribute 300 million more, very active winter sports participants. It has the confidence, because China is also very aggressively, pushing forward a grassroots level, on campus, on school, overall, athletic development program, and also by deregulating a lot of administrative control on social and market practices to support sporting development. And when it comes to the so-called niche sport, and I think it will free up the market in southern China even, because it only takes indoor skating facilities. And I know it's becoming increasingly popular in Shanghai and in southern China. So I'm not so worried about once you have such a huge base of the pyramid of big demographic population basis, it will in the long term contribute to the well-being of the Chinese people and the economy, and of course it will be good news for international sporting.
Mr. Farnsworth, because you are coming us through the satellite feed, I'm not sure whether you can read the lights in the eyes of Mr. Dong when he's talking about China bidding for the Winter Games, but that really reminded me of the time right in the year 2001 when China succeeded for the very first time to bid for the Summer Games. Everyone almost that from the younger generation went to the street and celebrate that specific moment. I even have goosebumps at this moment when I'm thinking about it. But Mr. Farnsworth, do you think China will be as excited as it used to be when it comes to such a big occasion like winning the Winter Olympic Game opportunities? Or this is going to be a much sober country in terms of international practices? What does that mean in terms of enthusiasm, in terms of the level of preparation possibly for the Games if China wins?
Well, I think any time a country is awarded something as significant as an Olympic Games, there is national excitement. We see what happens in all the countries around the world, whether it's Brazil and in Rio de Janeiro, we saw the excitement there. Every time the United States is awarded the Games, there's huge excitement, Europe, etc. So I would imagine that the Chinese people would be very excited, enthusiastic, very supportive. But you raise an important point. It's not going to be the first time, assuming Beijing wins, it's not going to be the first time that the Olympics will be hosted in China. So therefore that excitement might be a little bit reduced. There might be questions about the Winter Olympics versus the Summer Olympics. There might be a sense of, look, these are going to cost a lot of money. There's going to be a lot of things that have to change perhaps, and so there might be some sobering reality about that. But I think generally there will be great excitement, as there generally is, and I think there should be.
All right, Eric Farnsworth and also Dong Jun, thank you so much for being with us. We're waiting for the results, of course. When it comes, we're certainly going to share with everybody. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Then we're also going to invite both of you to come to our studio and talk about that. Thank you.